With that, I do want to say welcome to Kent C. Dodds.
Hello.
It's great to have you today.
It's good to be here.
I'm glad, so glad that you could make it. Let's give Kent a little applause in the chat, if you will. So today, we'd love to hear about Remix. Take it away, Kent. I won't keep you any longer.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say I have met Matthew Renzi. We spoke at KCD or KCDC, Kansas City Developer Conference years ago, and he brought a HoloLens with him, and we played this AR game on the HoloLens, and it just blew my mind. It was one of the coolest things I've ever done. So. Yeah, that's cool that you are going to have him speak next. That'll be sweet.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay, yeah. So this is my first talk after the car accident I was involved in. I'm glad to still be here. But yeah, please excuse me if I'm going to blame all mess ups on my accident, I guess, is what I'm saying. So I do have a broken collarbone that I'm recovering from. And I am able to like type and move my elbow joint works, but this joint doesn't work very well. So before I get started on Remix, I just want to mention that we are doing an in-person conference in May in Salt Lake City, RemixConf, and it is awesome. We've got some really awesome speakers so far and an awesome MC. You can still submit talks and stuff. We're still accepting those. We've got a bunch of awesome sponsors, many of you who probably know lots of these logos. Some you might not be familiar with, and so I invite you to check these out. I especially love the seasoned one because they gave us like a pitch page. It's like why Remix is so amazing, and it's actually really cool. So check that out. That company is an interesting one. But yeah, RemixConf coming in May. It's going to be sweet, and I hope to see lots of you there. Go ahead and raise your hand if you are going to be there. I'd love to like virtual high five for you. But yeah, I want to talk about Remix and why I think Remix is just so stellar. I started working with Remix back about a year ago is when I started working on Remix quite a bit. And I was rebuilding my website, kentcdodds.com. And this website, what it used to be was a pretty static standard site that was built with Gatsby. This is the old site. And I had a couple of problems with it. One of them was the builds took forever because I had to rebuild the entire site anytime I had a typo anywhere. And like if I wanted to have any dynamic stuff, you can see, if you look closely, you'll see this loading workshop details pop in. Any dynamic stuff that I wanted had to happen on the client. And so that resulted in a bunch of loading states. And so I was ready to try something new, and I was excited about Remix because I just thought that Remix would be like very well suited to what I wanted to do. And so yeah, now my workshops, are no bouncing around or anything. It's awesome. And in fact, it just occurred to me I should totally add a workshop for RemixConf because we do have a workshop. I'm giving workshops, so I should list that right here. But anyway, in the process of rebuilding my website with Remix, I just totally fell in love with what it could do for me. And eventually I decided all I wanted to do was, like, despite the fact that I have these really awesome courses and stuff and like could update them and add new ones, all I wanted to do was have like one giant Remix course right here. Just be like, now Remix is all that I teach, because it really is all I like. When you are learning Remix, or using Remix, so many of the things that I teach in lots of these other courses are still valuable for some scenarios, but a lot of them, it's not totally necessary for most people. And so all I wanted to do was teach Remix. And so in the process of talking with Ryan and Michael about, okay, how are we going to collaborate? We just decided it'd be easier if I joined the company. And so I did. And so I gave up all the total 100% freedom with my time of being self-employed, and switched over to Remix because I felt like I could make a better world a bigger impact on the world by joining Remix. So I want to tell you about why Remix captured me so strongly, and hopefully give you an idea of what it can do for the work that you're doing. So if you go to remix.run, that's our website, and you can actually scroll through, and we've got kind of this story as you're scrolling, and it's pretty sweet. And these are my slides basically. I just go through this thing and explain the things I love about Remix by scrolling through this. So the first thing that you need to know about Remix is that it's a web framework. It's a full stack web framework, so it's got a backend portion that can connect to a database and do all of that stuff. And then it has the front end portion for actually rendering stuff. And it uses React for the front end piece. It's not like super coupled to React. And so in the future, we may support any rendering library. Right now, React is the only one currently supported. And then on the back end, it's you can deploy it anywhere that you want to. So you can deploy it to Node. You can have an Express server if you like. Integrate it with your Fastify, or you integrate it with your Koa or whatever. You can also deploy it to Dino, and you can deploy it to, well, that's like coming soon, like very soon, Dino support, like in the next couple weeks. Cloudflare Workers is supported, and so even non-node environments are supported for the backend portion. And so that's what Remix is. The focus for Remix, the why behind Remix, is we feel like there are user experiences that we have on the web that could be drastically improved by taking advantage of the modern technology that we have today, as well as the web fundamentals that we've had for years. And so I want to talk about how we got to where we are now, to the problems that we're trying to, like the problems that Remix is trying to solve. So like, how did we get to the situation we are now? And how does Remix kind of change the game for us? So I'm just going to look on the left here for apps without Remix. So the way that apps work, web apps work, is the browser has to go get an HTML document to display the HTML, which then will include CSS and JavaScript requirements, as well as images and that sort of thing. And so in the when the browser makes that request, there's something going on behind the scenes while all of that's happening. And so the browser has to show the user some form of loading state. And so typically the favicon will like have a spinner in it. Maybe in the bottom right or bottom left, it'll have some sort of waiting on this resource or something. But in the middle, all you can do is a white screen. Like that's like the browser can't do any more than that. It has no idea. Even if the server is going to send an HTML document, it could send like a file to download. It has no idea. And so it just shows a white screen. Well, back in the olden days, servers were located all the way across the world. They were slow, like the database queries had to be made, whatever. And so the white screen was showing up for an extended period of time, which was not a great user experience. And so what we did was we did the same thing to our HTML document that we did to our CSS and JS. We would put that on a CDN. Which is a bunch of servers all over the world, so that it can be geologically, I guess that's the wrong word. Isn't that like rocks? It's located relatively closer, I guess, somewhere in the world. And so that means that it's much faster. And also because it's static, there's no like server processing or anything. It just literally is sending a file. So it's quite a bit faster because of that. And so rather than waiting for a white screen for 5 seconds, we can, within like 1 second, send them some sort of loading spinner to at least communicate, hey, like better than the favicon spinning, we can say, hey, like this is an app geographically, thank you, geographically close. We can say, hey, like this is the real application. You're here, you're right in the right spot. We're just loading all of your data. And so the Jamstack was born. And so we would like pre-render as much as we could at build time, and then send a bunch of skeleton UI and then load all of that data as it's needed. And I have one example that I hope they never update this, because I kind of hate to call them out so bad, but I kind of love it too. So because it's just such a brilliant example of a company that has basically infinite resources and has some really serious problems because they've taken this approach. And it's YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com, then the first thing we're going to do is request the document. And now the next thing we're going to do is get the desktop Polymer thing. This is a very, very large JavaScript file that is like their entire framework and everything. But the document does have some loading state. So we do see, oh yes, I am on youtube.com. I'm not going to some random other place. So I can see that I've got like my loading state here. But because this application requires JavaScript to render anything, we have to wait 30 seconds on a really slow network connection to load that 1.3 megabytes of JavaScript. And then here's the other kicker. Oh no, they fixed it. Or maybe it loaded fast. I waited too long. Here, let's try this again. It would be kind of a shame if they fixed it, because it's a really good demonstration of what I was trying to illustrate. It's fine if it's great if they fixed it, actually. So okay, we're loading, and when the desktop Polymer JavaScript file loads, then it can actually render the actual elements. Right now, I don't even know what this is rendering. Maybe it's canvas or it's something interesting. But yeah, there's like basically nothing in here, is there? It's an iframe. No, a couple divs and stuff. There's not much in here. And that's kind of the point, right, of a loading state. When you've got like a highly dynamic application, there's not much you can put in there. So I'm doing searches and hitting enter, and it's still loading more JavaScript to actually respond to these events that I'm sending to it. All that it's doing right now is it's saying prevent default. And so this is a really bad experience. And I have actually experienced this being a problem for me. This isn't just something I made up. This has been a real problem for me as a user of YouTube when I have a bad connection and I load up YouTube and then I type a search and I hit enter and my search is cleared. That's not an awesome experience, but it's because the entire application relies so heavily on client-side JavaScript to work. Well, what's really cool is that the web knows how to handle those form submissions and things. And so it'd be really cool if we could have the entire HTML document served to the user so they have the form and everything, and that form could work even before the JavaScript loads. But again, remember, the entire reason we did this JavaScript heavy stuff, the front end client stuff, was so that we don't have the white screen of nothing while we wait for the server to send that response. Well, what would happen if you could make it so that your server can send the response and it can be now I'm looking at it geographically located close to where the user is. In that environment, you can actually send a response in like 250 milliseconds. You can send a response really fast, even on a slow connection. And so if you're in that world, then why don't you just send the entire document rather than sending a spinner? On top of that, we also are doing like lazy loading of code and data. And so we end up with this waterfall effect, which we've all experienced on your power company website or your banking website, where things are just popping in over time. And it's because of all of the optimizations that we've made to avoid that initial, white screen. But if you can just make it so the white screen isn't there for very long, you just respond really quickly, basically as fast as a CDN can, then you don't need to have any of these loading states. You can have the entire HTML document ready. And because Remix understands real actual post requests and things, you can have these links all work and the mutations even work without the JavaScript finishing loading. So once that HTML is there, the app is ready to go. And then it's progressively enhanced by having the JavaScript load, so you don't need full page refreshes and stuff. So that's the biggest premise of Remix is, hey, let's rethink the way that we solved this white screen problem and use modern infrastructure and modern techniques to make it so that it's not so slow. And it's amazing. Like we've seen response times of less than 100 milliseconds as kind of a standard. My response time on my website is 250 milliseconds. I actually haven't tested this in a while, so hopefully I don't regret this. But if I'm on a slow 3G network going to my website, kentcdodds.com, then my response time was 2.5 seconds on a slow network connection. That's really fast. You compare that to YouTube, my friends. And yeah, and the whole thing is ready. Like we're still loading JavaScript and stuff. We're still loading images and whatnot, but I can actually start using this. I'm like, oh, use effect versus use layout effect. Okay, that's interesting. Or I could navigate over to the login screen and actually perform this login request. So I didn't practice any of this, but let's do this. Me at kentcdodds.com. The JavaScript hasn't finished loading. Oh, I guess it must have if I'm showing that pending UI, but I guess it was too fast. But in any case, like this will work. You turn off your JavaScript, it will work. Make the JavaScript take a long time to load, it'll work. And that's awesome. I think that's a really cool feature of Remix, the ability to work before the JavaScript loads. But here's the really cool thing. And this is I'm going to do a live demo that I haven't actually like sort of practiced before this. So you're getting the raw Kent here, but I'm going to do a live demo showing what can we do now that we have the user there. So it's cool to be able to load fast, but like, what about once they're there? Like, don't you want to have a nice experience as they're using the app? And yes, the answer is yes, you do. So yeah, say goodbye to Spinageddon. So here's part of the story of what we can do when the user's there. Not only do we want the initial page load to be fast, but we also want their interactions to be fast as well. And so because Remix is your compiler and it's your developer, or not your developer, your bundler, we're able to know exactly what resources are going to be needed, not just the JavaScript, but also the data and the CSS and whatever else. We know all of that that's going to be needed as the user is navigating around. And so when the user hovers over something, or eventually we'll add some metrics for like when the user's moving to a link. So before they even get close to it, but when we can see that they're moving, we'll be able to do something like that. And we can start prefetching all of the stuff that they're going to need by the time they actually click on it. And so we can say, hey, we're getting their sales and their sales nav data, and we're getting their invoices and their invoice data and the invoice CSS. And by the time the user actually clicks, it's instant because it's all been cached. And what's cool about this is we're just using the platform. These are just prefetched link tags. There's nothing like super special about this, except for the fact that because we're using the platform, this goes into the browser cache rather than some in-memory cache, which will get thrown away if you close the browser tab or something. So this is using the platform is actually really great for this case because you don't have to think about garbage collection or anything. The browser already handles all of that for you, like cache invalidation. All of that stuff is handled for you by the platform. And you have nice platform APIs to make that work. It's awesome. So yeah, data loading is cool, but I want to talk about, and I'm going to demo some of the updating of data. So let's see. I know I just don't have as much time as I usually do when I give this talk. So I'll just really briefly show you. This is a basic example of a route module in Remix. You have your default export that renders the elements, the React elements that you want to have rendered on the page. You have your loader that's responsible for loading data, and your action that's responsible for responding to user mutations. And the loader right here, this and the action, both of these run completely on the server. And what's really cool about this is basically you think about your React apps that you're building today, and you've got your use effects or your React queries or whatever. All of the code that you write in there, you just move to the server. This has a lot of really awesome implications. If you're using GraphQL, you can move that really, really big GraphQL client or Apollo client or whatever else you're using to the server. So you no longer need to send that to the browser. So we can send things, the entire experience to the user faster, and we send less to the user. So it loads faster also, even more, even faster. And so you move everything onto the server in the loader. The other cool thing about this is you have complete database access. You can use secret keys, whatever else, because this is running on the server. So you don't need to worry about environment variables leaking to your front-end app. And on top of that, you can also trim down the amount of data that you're sending back to the client inside of the loader. So if you have to hit a bunch of endpoints and like combine their values or do some sort of computation or something, and then send the result to your UI, you can do all that on the server and save even more bandwidth for the user when they're making all these network requests to get this data. So that is awesome. That's a really cool part of the fact that this runs on the server. The other thing is, you always need to have a server of some kind when you're handling form submissions, and you need to do validations on the server because clients can circumvent client-side validation. And so all of that can live right in here. And what's cool about this is if you want to have a progressively enhanced experience and have it so that the user is typing and they get some feedback as they're typing, you can take the validation that you've got in your action and move it to a module level function. And now you can call it in both places. So you actually get real true code sharing. And I do this on my site. It's really awesome to be able to do that. So let's talk a little bit more about the action. Sorry if this is feels a little bit quick. It is. So lots of frameworks talk about how you load data, and loading data is awesome. That's great. But mutating data is what makes our application so hard. That's like why we spend so much time doing this. And Remix has really solved this problem in an awesome way. And the way that we solve it is through the use of forms. And so like all mutations are forms. Even your trash can icon is not just a button, it's a button within a form. And instead of an on click, you have you're using the form and it does like a full form post. And so what's really cool about that is that will also work without JavaScript or before JavaScript finishes loading. But it also means that Remix can manage all of the state for updating that, not only that value, but all the values on the page when those mutations are made. So kind of getting ahead of myself, but here's how you do this. You have this invoice route that has the form that collects all the data that you need. And then in the same file, you have your action that manages that. Now, if there's like a bunch of logic in here, I can understand why some people might be like, I don't want my logic right there. You can, it's JavaScript, my friends. You can move it to another file and like share it and whatever. But personally, I actually really like being able to put that logic right there if it doesn't need to be shared and if it's relatively simple. In any case, you can very clearly see where the server code for this particular action is supposed to take place. And then your request object right here and this form data thing and this redirect, all of these are web platform APIs. The redirect is a little helper that creates a response object, but this is a web fetch request. The response that comes back from redirect is a web fetch response. The form data is a web fetch thing too. So the people are really happy to find that as they're using Remix, they spend a lot of time on MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, learning the web platform APIs that they should have learned when they started doing web dev. Or that I guess like you do your web dev however you like. But I feel like it would be really nice if I spend a lot more of my time learning the web platform than the framework that I'm using. And that's what a lot of people are finding with Remix. So to take things even further, as cool as this is, we can, I almost always forget about this part. So let's talk about what's really cool about that. So I mentioned that you don't have to worry about managing state or anything like that. So there is no need for you to think about, oh, they just made a mutation. I've got all of the state on the page that's going to be affected by that mutation. Remix will automatically go and update the state that's on the page for you. It recalls all the loaders and the loaders go hit the database and say, oh, sweet, new values. Let me send those back. And so Remix will do this for you automatically. And what's really cool is it also manages race conditions and resubmissions for you too. So if the user creates a new invoice or they do a new thing before your get requests are finished to like that revalidation, then Remix will cancel those because it knows that those are out of date already because the user submitted something new. And it will make that new submission and go and get the new values. So you don't have to worry about form resubmissions or race conditions. It always makes sure that the most correct values are the ones that come back. And it's just not a thing you think about. Like, I'm serious, folks. You don't have to think about application state management anymore when you're using Remix. It's phenomenal. Now, of course, there is like UI state that sometimes can be useful, but most often the UI state is like for a component, and like your component authors at your company, which maybe it's you, they're still going to be using regular React for that stuff. But there's a lot of stuff that us product engineers on the team are have to do with React state, and you don't have to do that anymore. So that is awesome. On top of that, we can give a really nice user experience with some other features that Remix exposes to you. So this use transition hook from Remix will tell you when you're in a submitting state, so you can give the user some sort of feedback that says, hey, we're creating the invoice now, or some spinner if you need to. But even better than a spinner is to just pretend that the whole thing worked. And this is a very common pattern called optimistic UI. A good example of this is the Twitter like button. When you click the Twitter like button, it instantly shows that that tweet has been liked. But of course, it's not instant. It is going to make a network request. And if that tweet was deleted, then that heart is no longer highlighted, and you get this little message that says that tweet was deleted. So it's optimistic, but not always right. But it's better to be optimistic because most of the time it is. And so in the same way, I've implemented optimistic UI in AngularJS, in Backbone, in React, with React Query. And React with React Query was the easiest I'd ever been able to do it with like fewest bugs until Remix came around. And now Remix makes it so easy. You aren't thinking about time. You're not thinking about anything except for what should I show given the current state of the world. And if we've got a submission, instead of showing the form, we'll show the same component that I render on the invoice details page, and we'll just send whatever the user entered as their submission details for that component to render. So we can instantly show them the next thing that they're going to be looking at, assuming that this works. And if it doesn't, you don't think about rollbacks. Like if there's an error, you normally with optimistic UI, you always have to think, oh, okay, so what happens if it breaks? Now I've got to like update my store or whatever. You don't think about it. You don't. It's amazing. You literally just say, oh, we're no longer in a submission. We never transitioned because it was never finished successfully. And so we're still on the new invoice page because there's no longer a submission. We're going to show that form again. And so I can't tell you enough how simple that is from an optimistic UI standpoint. So cool. So cool. Okay, so I'm just trying to think of how much time I've got left. I just want to talk about nested routes for a second, because this is just so nice. So you might notice up here that in our little example here, we're just rendering a div with our projects and links to the projects in the form. This could be within some part of a bigger UI, like where you don't have a header and footer and left nav and top nav or whatever within this UI. But this is the way that you typically build React route modules. Is you have each route module responsible for the part of the UI that's relative to the part of the URL that it maps to. So the root of the URL maps to the entire app. And so in our example here, it's responsible for rendering this left nav, and then it renders what's called an outlet for all of its children. So any child, like whether it's dashboard, accounts, sales, expenses, reports, any of those will be rendered right here. That's where the root route is rendering the outlet. The sales route is responsible for rendering this top nav and then another outlet. And then the invoices route is responsible for rendering the list and the totals here, and then another outlet right here. And then finally, the invoices is not a parent, so it doesn't render an outlet, just is responsible for rendering this piece. So each one of these routes is just responsible for the UI that it cares about. It's not thinking about its parents. It's also not thinking about its children beyond where those children should be rendered. And so that has some enormous implications. So with other frameworks that do not support true nested routing, they support like file-based nested routing, but true nested routing as in like we only care about the part of the UI that is relevant to us. For those frameworks, because you have to think about the parents and the children, you have to load all of the data that's necessary for it. You're writing the code for that in every single route where the sales nav appears or the user nav appears or whatever. This gets to be very repetitive. The UI is a little less of a problem because the UI, sorry, I'm going to regret not filling this up before. Because the UI is just like you make a layout component and it's annoying, but it's fine. But loading data, that's a real problem. With Remix, because you have nested layout or nested routes, you can just say, hey, my sales route is just responsible for loading. Maybe I've got an A/B test or some user access stuff to load what the nav is. But I'm also on the invoices route, I'm loading just the data for the totals. I don't even have to like load all of the invoices necessarily or all of the data for the invoices. I can just like do all that computation on the server and send just the stuff that I need for the UI. And I'm loading the list, just like the title, the date or the year, I guess. Maybe I'm not sure what that is. Maybe the number and the total and maybe whether it's due or not. So I can do all that computation on the server and just send the bits that I need for the client. And then for the invoice ID, I can load all of the details. So it just makes it really easy. Like the developer experience here, my friends, like will blow your minds, and it's awesome. So that is nested routes. I'm going to speed through the error management as well. We keep the happy path happy by saying, here's where you do things if everything's fine. And if something blows up, then you have a completely separate thing for that blow up. But again, because we have nested routes, that's going to be contextual. So like everything else on the page will work except for that part that blew up. So maybe this invoice has some bad data, so it's accessing a property that doesn't exist. And so now, normally, the way the errors work is React error boundaries don't work on the server render. And so what you're going to end up with is like some sort of giant error page that maybe has a header and the footer, and you're just hoping those work. And maybe a koala that has a tear on its face, and it's saying, I'm sorry, something's broken. And so your user is going to report that and just say, something's broken. Whereas if you have a contextual error like this, the user is going to say, hey, I can click on all of these other things. Like everything else is working. It's just when I click on this invoice. And now like you've saved your support personnel a ton of time. So Remix is awesome for that reason also. And then, yeah, also the error boundaries will bubble up. Nested routing. It's amazing. Okay, so I want to give you a quick demo. There's tons more stuff. Like we didn't talk about styling and a bunch of other problems that are solved by that. But I want to give you a demo of like how we can, like now that we've got the user on the page, we've loaded it super fast and everything. What is the user's experience while they're here? How can we make things like create a really nice user experience here? So this is a simple Remix app that I booted up. It has a full database and everything. I've got a Postgres database running in Docker. I bootstrapped this app in like 5 minutes. It has user authentication and everything. And yeah, so we've got some really cool things coming soon for folks who want to just get up and going really quick. And it's awesome. So anyway, we have this simple form. Let me see. What do I want to show first? We've got our loader. And the loader is responsible for loading these notes. We're using Prisma to go into our Postgres database, get all of the notes. And actually, you know what? One other thing I just remembered, I want to order by ID descending so that they go in order that I maybe created by would probably be better. Created. Oh, actually, I don't think it has a created by. That would be something to update eventually. But anyway, so this is responsible for getting the user ID. So whoever's logged in, which is me, of course, and get all of my notes, order by descending, and then send back those notes. And then on the client, I've got my component here that gets that data from this use loader data hook. And that data, if there are no notes, then I just say no notes yet. Otherwise, I render out the notes. So if let me just actually finish with the form here. So you've got this form with the method of post. Oh, that's okay. I know what's going on here. Yeah, that's fine. And then we have our input. Yeah, you could make this better, of course. This is a basic example. Probably want to have a real label here. A button that says save. And there are a couple of things on here that you might be surprised to see, and we'll maybe talk about those here in a little bit. But yeah, all of this totally works. And I can say, oh, actually, sorry. One other thing before I show you that on the action function here, this again, this just runs on the server. I get the user ID, I get the form stuff. And again, this is all web platform APIs to get that form data. And now I can get which action is being taken, whether it's delete or create. And again, this could all be moved somewhere else if you wanted to. You can even make a resource route and have the entire action function be in a different file if you wanted to. I don't know why you'd want to, but you could if you wanted to. So here then in the create note case, we can say get the title, get the body. And yeah, the body is actually required, but I got rid of that to simplify things for us. Then we'll create the note and redirect to the notes. So if I create a note, hello, and hit enter, we're on a slow 3G. Oh, spoiler alert, slow 3G. We'll get to that in a second. We can create these notes. Sweet. And say boom. Okay, cool. It totally works. And this is all fetch requests and everything happening right here. So that's cool. And then we can delete these as well. And that's all happening in the delete case. We just get the note ID and we delete the note. Okay, so that's all happening. So what's neat about this is I can say, hey, let's disable JavaScript. And now the JavaScript fails to load. For some reason, there are lots of reasons that JavaScript can fail to load, but this works. So that's neat. the whole thing works. I can still delete, I can still save, I can do all this stuff. And the JavaScript is even on the page to prevent default. So you might notice that if we slow things down to slow 3G, what? Yeah, sure. And I hit enter, you'll get a spinner right here. And this thing changes. So people know, they get the feedback that something's happening when you don't have JavaScript on the page. And Remix just like, it just works. And that is cool. So here's the rub, I guess, as they say. So if I enable JavaScript again, and we're on this slow 3G network, then I say stuff, and I hit save, then I, as the user, have no feedback. This isn't spinning, like nothing's going on. If I delete, same story. I have no feedback that this app has actually responded to my request. This is not a good thing. Because we had it before and we don't have it now. Now, here's the really cool thing is you can actually say, hey, you know what? I don't have time to give people this good feedback. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stick with this form, but I'm going to say reload document. And we'll put reload document on both of these forms. Now, all of a sudden, it still is a single page app. And like all the client transitions and everything are going to be actual transitions and like client-side transitions. But for this new feature that I'm working on and I need to ship like right now and it just needs to work, it works. Even though I've got a slow 3G, like I'm getting feedback as the user. I know that something's happening. I know that it works. And so I'm not like questioning, oh, did it work? No, I can see that like it's responding. It's just not a great user experience. But like I can ship this and I can say, hey, I'm going on vacation. I'll make the experience better when I get back. That's very different from what we have today, where you have to do a bunch of extra work just to get it in a working state. So, of course, like we don't want it just to work. We want it to work well, right? We want to have a nice user experience. So this is where progressive enhancement comes in. We have this, oh, well, thank you, Copilot. We have this handy hook called use transition from Remix that gives you some insight into all the transitions that are going on the page, which of course there's only one. You can only transition one at a time. And so here I can say, if we like, let's see, what did I call it? Is creating. So if the transition dot state is submitting, or we can kind of skip that and just say if there is a submission, then that is going to have some form data. And again, form data, just a platform API. And we'll say get action. So if the action is create note, then I know that there is a transition going on right now with the submission where the action is create note. That means we're in the creating state. And so now I can say, hey, if we're creating, then let's say saving. Otherwise, we'll just say save. So now if we, oh, whoops. Okay, refresh, start over. There we go. So now if we go slow 3G and say stuff, now, oh, okay, I see that something's happening. It's going slow, but I'm getting some feedback. You could do a spinner in there. We can actually also do disabled is creating. And I hate the throttling stuff when I'm just doing a full page refresh on this. Okay, sweet. Now I get like this really nice state here that's saying, hey, we are responding to the thing that you're doing. We could also do this at a global level too and have like the little bar that goes across the top or whatever we want. And here's the really awesome thing about all of this. The really awesome thing is I didn't have to change my mental model at all. So it works the way that the web has always worked, and it works with a nice progressive enhancement where I'm just saying, hey, if there's a transition going on, then I now know that like I can show the saving state and no mental model changed. Like it's all exactly the same. That is really awesome to be able to progressively enhance, not only from the user's perspective, but also like in the code. There's not a lot there. So that coworker who said, hey, I'm going to ship this with a reload document thing, you say, hey, like, why don't you spend 5 more minutes and just add a use transition in place? But maybe they're waiting for the designs for the loading state or something. But that's awesome. Now I want to take it a step further and let's talk about the delete. So here's what we're going to do for the delete. We're going to do basically the same thing, except we're going to say is deleting, and that's going to be transition get note ID is equal to note.id. So now I can say disabled is deleting, deleting, otherwise delete. Okay, cool. So now we get the same thing for our deleting state. You say delete, and it's deleting. I kind of want to have the dot, dot, dot. I kind of like the dot, dot, dot. Okay, so here's like another situation where it's like, that was pretty easy. Here, I'm going to put a bunch of these in here really quick, and I'm going to show you the problem. So we're going to delete that one. That's nice. It goes away, and it's that's the pending UI that I'm looking for, and we get our spa experience that we have grown to love without changing our mental model. It all works exactly the same. Oh yeah, and like I mentioned this already, but like, did you notice that I'm not doing anything to update the data? Like when I delete, I'm not saying, hey, go update the data. I'm not like none of that. I just say, hey, here's a form, nice declarative API for some mutation. And then Remix manages like updating the data for me. Like that is so cool. Goodbye Redux. Like, oh my goodness. It's so nice. It's so nice. Okay. So here's another problem that we need to overcome. If I go slow 3G, and I want to delete a bunch of these. As the user, I'm going to go boom, 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 boom. Wait a second. What the devil? And I'm going to look at that like, I thought I was deleting those others. And then I wait long enough for the request to finally finish. And look, they're all gone. That's awesome. So let's look at what the network did. So what Remix does, each one of those, there were 4 notes. I deleted each one. And this is so cool. So it automatically cancels all of those requests. It doesn't care about the response anymore. Because the user did a different thing. This is what the browser does, by the way. If you turn off JavaScript or if you're just using regular forms and you go boom, 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 it actually, it cancels itself. Like that's what the browser is going to do is it'll cancel. It'll say, oh, you don't want to go there after all. I'm going to go here instead. You don't want to do that, that post. So here, the good thing and bad thing, or just the thing to know, is that once a request has been made, you can cancel the response, but you can't cancel the request. So the request is already gone, like too late. You're not going to be able to cancel that, but you can ignore the response, which is what Remix is going to do here with the cancellation of these posts. So that's really cool because you actually save on compute resources, and you don't, because we don't care about what the response is going to be anyway, because we're doing a new post. But the challenge with that is that, well, yeah, and actually on top of that, when that final post is successful, then we are going to go and revalidate everything. And so our state eventually is correct. So even though that user experience was kind of weird, the ultimate state is eventually exactly what it should be. And that is stellar, my friends. That is awesome. So you don't have bugs. You just have like less than optimal user experiences. And that is different. Those are 2 different, very different things. So no bugs, just less than optimal user experiences, which we can improve. And we're going to do that right now. So what's going on here is you might not have realized this, but every single one of these posts that we're making is actually a navigation. We're navigating, and that is what's going on in our action as well, as we're redirecting back to notes. So we navigate with this post, and then we're redirecting back to notes. So like the user does, it doesn't feel like a navigation, but that's exactly what's happening. That's the way that the web mutations have always been modeled. As a navigation just happens to be a post instead of a get, and then the server sends back the HTML, and now you're on that page. And if you hit refresh, now you're going to resubmit. That's why you get that confirm resubmission thing. So you don't have this problem when you do a redirect though. But anyway, this particular use case doesn't really make a lot of sense to do as a navigation. And so we're going to change this, completely change the experience and not the mental model. This, like, watch closely, my friends, because this is a really cool refactor. So I don't want to do a transition for each one of these. It doesn't make sense. And I want to be able to do multiple at the same time. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this right here, and we're going to let's convert it to an anonymous function. Sure. We're going to call this our note display. And this is now our note display component. We're going to accept a note as a prop. And now this note display is what we're going to be rendering instead. And actually, you know what? I think I still want to keep the li right here. So we're going to move the li up here and move this li up right there. We need to wrap this in a fragment because we've got 2 things going on right there. Okay, cool. And then the note display is going to take a note. And the last thing that we need is the transition. Okay, so we could just pass the transition along, but remember, this transition is for our actual like navigations. That's what this transition is. So there can only be one navigation at a time, and that's why it works to just be a global thing. There's just one transition on the whole page at once. But we want to be able to do multiple requests at once. And so instead of this transition, we're going to have our own transition that is called useFetcher. And useFetcher works exactly the same. I don't need to change anything else except, oh, sorry, I need to change one other thing. Sorry. I'm going to rename this to Fetcher. And I'm also, instead of using the global form, which is like, oh, global form, global mutation, global transition, global navigation. Instead of that, I'm going to say, I want to fetcher this fetcher's form. And so then this is how you do the mutation, and the fetcher contains the submission data that you're going to need. So sweet. Now I come over here and I say, here, let's turn off the throttling really quick, get a couple notes in here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's throttle now. And I go boom, 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 boom. And all like everything is canceled properly until it's finally everything is updated to what it should be. So we get the really nice pending UI. We could, I don't know if I've got time to show you optimistic UI for this, maybe, but yeah, that might take a little bit more time than I have though. But yeah, optimistic UI is pretty straightforward for this as well. It would probably take me about 10 minutes, but it would take me longer to explain what I'm doing. So yeah, it doesn't take a lot of time. And then like you don't have bugs. It's awesome. And look at this. We didn't change our mental model at all. I didn't have to change any of my backend code. Like the backend code I haven't touched this whole time. And now it's doing like a regular SPA fetch thing. And it's still using this form thing. Ah, this is so cool. So yeah, I love it. It's amazing. There's one mental model for the whole thing, for everywhere in your app. So what we've been used to is we're just like, hey, I've got like this problem that I need to solve, and I am developer A, and so I'm going to solve it in this way. And that seems like a very natural thing to do. Like we solve it in the way that we do. And then developer B comes around and they're like, hey, I don't understand the way that you solve this. And developers A is like, well, you don't have the same mental model I do. And they say, well, yeah, okay, so explain to me your mental model. So now all of a sudden the team has to do all of this stuff to keep their mental models in sync. To make, we're doing trainings together and stuff. And all of that is valuable. I think you should still do that. But wouldn't it be cool if the entire app had the same mental model for mutations and loading data? That's like, those are huge aspects of building this, and not just this application, but every application you build for every client that you're building or that you're creating apps for, or every app at your company. That would be sweet. And so anyway, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to share with you about Remix. One mental model, whether you're doing the very simple thing, it scales really down really well, and it scales up to really complex things super well. So if it's not clear, I really love Remix. I think it's awesome, and I hope that you give it a shot. If you want to, then you can go to the docs, and the quick start should take you about an hour or less to go through all of this stuff and be exposed to a lot of the APIs that we support. The Jokes app will take you longer, but it goes like super deep. It's like way in depth. We create a database, set up authentication, do all sorts of really cool stuff. So I strongly advise you go through this as well if you really want to get deep in understanding how Remix works. Other than that, I am just happy to be here, and thank you for giving me some of your time today. And yeah, I hope you try Remix and that you love it. Thanks.
Thanks, Kent. That was awesome. Do you have anything else you want to call out, places they should follow, things like that?
Sure. So we also have a Discord. So if somebody wants to drop a link to our Discord, it's discord.gg/remix. We've got a YouTube. That one's a little tough to search for. So you can do, maybe I should paste a link to it. But if somebody wants to find it, remix is kind of a funny term when you're searching on YouTube.
Yes.
We're remix_run on Twitter. And,
cool. And then those do link from the main website, right? Remix Run?
Yep. Just scroll down to the bottom.
Great.
Yeah, I guess I could just say that. And then, of course, we would love to have you come to Salt Lake to RemixConf because it's great. And I hope to see you all there.